Hello and welcome to this episode of the Star Wars Universe podcast. Today we are not only talking about, I think, one of the best episodes of television I've seen in a long time, episode 5 of Andor. We are doing it with both myself, Paul Hoppy, and a TikToker who I've enjoyed for quite a long time, who has agreed to be our guest, AJ Starkiller. You may know him as Jedi Starkiller on TikTok and on Twitter, and he's going to be here with us. We're going to have great conversations, all that and more after a commercial break that the corporation whose name I always forget in Star Wars probably has control over, but who knows? Welcome back. I'm Matthew, one of your hosts. I'm joined, as almost always, by erstwhile guest, Mr. Paul Hoppy, who hopefully won't comment on the fact that I probably should use the word erstwhile wrong. Paul, how are you doing today?
I'm well. I will resist commenting on that, but I will say you're correct, I believe. Anyway,
and as I mentioned, I personally got into TikTok because I wanted more places to have these conversations with folks. And I wanted to engage in those conversations and then eventually trick those people into wanting to come on my podcast. And we had a couple of people do that already. Jedi Starkiller has been one of my favorite voices on TikTok. Really getting into, first of all, I think I first saw your stuff, AJ, when you were, like a lot of us, really pushing back against the hate that was being directed towards the actors of Kenobi. Particularly the actress playing Reva, and I just really started to enjoy your stuff and found that not only are you incredibly insightful about Star Wars, but a lot of times you have a great deal of knowledge about it and just put a lot of thought into it in the way that a lot of the rest of us have, who have clearly wasted too much of our free time engaging in this fictional universe. So say hello. How you doing?
Well, thank you very much. Your words are too kind. I am already incredibly happy to be here. I've also been a fan of your content as well and joined TikTok for much the same reason, because what is the point of having spent so many years learning about, reading about all of this fun stuff in this fictional universe if I don't find other people to talk about it with?
Right? Like, how many of us were told by our parents or people in high school, like, stop blathering about that. No one cares. You know what? I found 984 people who cared about what we said last week. Not that I obsessively check our listener numbers or anything. But so I'm still going to have this. So let's actually stop being self-narcissistic and jump into the topic. And I'll do that actually by letting you be a little bit self-narcissistic and tell us more about yourself. What's kind of your story with Star Wars? Like, when did you first enter the Star Wars universe? How has your kind of feelings over it grown and changed and made you into the fan and the content creator you are now?
So Star Wars has always been a very big part of who I am. I was one of those kids who grew up with the VHS copies of the movies. And so, like, I wore out, I remember fast forwarding, I think it was the first, like, DVD, or the VHS that had the interviews with George Lucas before the movie. And so you'd always have to rewind the VHS, and then I'd fast forward through George Lucas talking, and there's him talking about different things. Then I'd get to watch the movie, and I just always watched Empire and Return of the Jedi. Loved those two as a kid, but where I always tell people, it was being 10 years old and seeing The Phantom Menace in theaters that changed me. And not just for Star Wars, but forever. Seeing it's the Darth Maul lighting up a double-bladed lightsaber with Duel of the Fates in the background, and that realization that they can do that. You know, like, they can have two blades, and, like, he looked so cool, and that fight blew my mind. And from there, I went and just started consuming every comic, every book I could get my hands on, and just, like, I never looked back.
Yeah. I love hearing that. I think in many ways that's a big thing that TikTok has helped bring me because, as people on this podcast have heard me say before, I'm a generation older. I was 21 when that movie came out, and I was at, the most, like, teenage, young adult, cynical, I know everything, and I just hated it because it was not what I wanted, because it was not my childhood memories that had built over 12 years combined with, everything at that age that I thought I wanted. And for a long time, I just didn't really ever think of the prequels as Star Wars movies. And a lot of it, first of all, the Clone Wars, I think, makes the second and third prequel movies just fundamentally better in so many ways. But also just listening to people like yourself who got to experience those movies as kids, and so got to have that sense of wonder and exploration, getting to see those movies through eyes like yours has, like, I still think the dialogue is terrible, and we're going to make fun of it.
Absolutely.
But I love that people love those movies, and I love getting to experience them through those eyes.
Well, what's really funny, if I may, is that I grew up alongside that hate for the prequels and grew up with that like echo chamber of people disliking them. And I remember going through a period of my life where I would actively trash on the prequels. I still loved them, but like whenever I was in company of other friends who were Star Wars fans longer, you know, they would always like talk bad about them, and I would join them. And to this day, I don't talk about it much because I prefer to talk about things that I like. Attack of the Clones has a fight for my least favorite movie. It like the entire first hour of that movie is a pain for me to get through, and like and it's all just George's dialogue is the main problem there, like you said. But like, and I didn't watch the Clone Wars until a few years ago, like before season 7 came out. I didn't watch Clone Wars until then because I was at that point where I was like, I like stuff from the prequels, but I don't like the prequel era. And it took really going back, watching the Clone Wars, and then particularly reading all of the supplemental material around that era. And now I love that era and I love those movies. But it really does, you're right, like the films alone do not make that era what it is. It's a combined effort of all of the media in that era.
Yeah, I think so.
It's interesting to hear that you watched, specifically you mentioned Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi over and over, which I also had on VHS, 2 copies, because I had the letterbox pan and scan, and then I had like the widescreen edition because I was like, okay, I need like the real, the actual thing that they filmed. And I also watched those 2 movies over and over and over. And it's funny because it's like, well, A New Hope came first, right? But like, not for me, it came out in 1977. I was born in 1978. Like, I believe I watched that movie after I saw Return of the Jedi, which I think I might have watched after I saw Empire Strikes Back. And so in a way, like A New Hope was like, for me, kind of like oh, that's the one with the cheesy George Lucas dialogue and like we did it, like kind of like sort of goofiness for me for a long time until I saw the prequel trilogy, which then I was like, oh, George wrote these, huh?
Yeah.
I think that just like you said, generation really has a lot to do with it. I found, honestly, A New Hope to be really slow when I was a kid, because the movies that I was used to seeing when I was 6, 7, 8, were movies that were coming out in the 90s. And so, like, it was just a different pace of cinema. And it took me getting older to enjoy A New Hope. Now A New Hope sits, high at the top of my list. Yeah. Because I can understand it. But, like, I mean, try being 10 years old and seeing Obi-Wan, Qui-Gon, and Darth Maul, and then going back again and watching Ben and Vader just tap sticks, essentially. I love it now, but watching them just go tink, 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 dead was such a jarring experience.
Whereas to me, I'm an even older generation than Paul, being a good 6 months older.
8 months. Anyway, go ahead. Not
to, the point, to me, it was new because it was on Betamax, not this fancy new VHS stuff. Anyway. There's a lot of people who are like, when the hell are you two all going to shut up and talk about Andor? So here's the transition. As we've talked about, like it's different styles of things, and I think I'm loving Andor so much because it's giving me something that Star Wars has never given, which is. And I feel like we've talked about this already, but I feel like this episode especially really narrowed home. Every one of these people is a person. Every character we have met, except maybe Mon Mothma's husband. But even there, I have a small part that thinks I understand where he's coming from. All of them are real people with flaws and with good sides, and some of them working for not good sides. And like, I'm just blown away by the sheer character nuance, because this is not. Like, the days in the life is not something I ever thought we'd get from Star Wars, and not something I ever thought I'd like as much as I do.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, like, the pace of the filmmaking allows for that. You know, it really is just a very different style of filmmaking than most of the, everything else we've seen in Star Wars.
And you're talking about the TV show, but like, yes, the filmmaking is probably the right. Like, TV making is not a term.
No, it's filmmaking. Even if they're shooting on digital, it doesn't. Yeah, but yeah, I'm not talking about the making of theatrical releases. It's the same medium, right? I mean,
and not using the volume has been a big thing. Like the volume, the way they've filmed The Mandalorian and stuff, like filming on location. That's one of the big differences, is everything, the scope, because that's the thing that the volume can't capture. And we saw that in Kenobi, like when Reva is looking at battling against the little speeder. And the sizes look off, the perspective looks off, and so like that's something that you just don't get without this level of filmmaking.
Yeah, like I liked Obi-Wan. I liked the Boba Fett show a lot more than many people did, but as an experiment, I watched the speeder chase in Boba Fett, and then watched the speeder chase in Return of the Jedi through the Andor forest, and it's just, I see why people think it's like the slowest speeder fight you're ever going to get. It's just like, I keep expecting the speeder to pause for a red light in between the streets on Tatooine. Well, so overall, kind of, AJ, what's been your thoughts on Andor?
Brilliant. Anyway, sorry.
I like the scene, but it's very slow.
Well, I was actually going to double down on something we were saying right there. I think the theme of this episode can be summed up in Vel's line to Andor after she's talking about what Lieutenant Gorn has gone through. Everyone has their own rebellion. Like you said, that's what this episode set up. Every single character, we see the negative impact that the Empire has had on their lives. Whether it's from Cyril losing his job, and the relationship that he has with his mom, whether it's Mon Mothma and her relationship with her daughter and with her husband, whether it's Cassian and Skeen bonding over, like being children in the system, and Skeen losing his brother, Gorn losing, like everyone has lost something to the Empire, and we're seeing it on a micro level, like Nemec talks about. It's not 40 atrocities to cover up a single one. Like those 40 atrocities are the things that are happening to every single person under Imperial rule, and they're hiding the one giant atrocity that is fascism.
Right.
And scene. That's the show.
Word.
No.
Yeah, I wrote that down also as one of my favorite lines, and may potentially become a tagline of the show, because it felt so perfect for Star Wars, and just like a friend of mine, Matthew Carroll, who's a guest on this. He's the head of the whole Stranded Panda network that this is a part of, and the MCU Cast, which is a fantastic MCU podcast. He would often say that he thought that the morality of Star Wars was more black and white than something like Star Trek. And I would often push back on him somewhat. And I do still think there is some ways to push back, but I think this show has been making me realize that there's a point he was making, which is that at the end of the day, in most Star Wars, there was still very clear good guys and bad guys. And here, the fact that, like, there were two characters who we spent time with where I found myself rooting for them. One of whom is an Imperial cop who was flat out trying to chase our hero. The other of whom is an even higher, but like you said, because we get this very sympathetic scene with her mother, which, like a brilliant scene. Like, just the cinematography around the bowl of cereal was so good. Yeah. Like, just watching that cereal get soggier because he can't eat as this woman keeps lecturing him. But then also getting to meet a mid-level woman bureaucrat in the Imperial Security Department, like even higher up levels of badness. And we're like watching her try to put the pieces of a puzzle together. And it's such a classic, like, everything in this scene is telling us to root for this person to put the pieces together. Because look how hard she's trying. Look how the system is against her. Look at her being plucky and awesome. And by the way, what she's doing is going to help, as you said, enforce fascism.
And I was just going to shout out my friend Beth on Mara J. Skywalker on pretty much everything as well. She made a wonderful point. She's a lawyer, and she's like, you can't make me not connect with a female in a male-driven industry who's taking space Adderall with her coffee to keep up with the men in her position and try to get ahead. And it's like,
such a good point.
That's such a human thing that like I never would have quite caught in the same way. And it just goes to show the level of thought that goes into this show, every aspect of it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it's really important that they're showing people on both sides, you know? And it's like, we understand that some of those people are on the side of like, you know, we've seen the collateral damage, basically, or just like the total disregard for, you know, the Kenari, the Aldani, like, and basically in each of these instances, it was like, oh yeah, this was a convenient place to keep their stuff, you know, or like, oh, they were going to mine some stuff from this place. It wasn't like some, you know, some big, like, you know, they didn't have some overarching manifesto. And I mean, I know the one was the Republic, right? That was before the Empire. But it's like, it wasn't necessarily as different as it's like made out to be, right? It's like a Republic can essentially be an empire before it calls itself an empire.
That is such an important takeaway from that first episode. If I had one criticism of that first episode, it's that they didn't make it more clear to the audience that that was not the Empire on Kenari, that was the Republic. And realizing that what is the Republic but the Empire without an emperor, so to speak. Like,
right.
All of the same framework is there. I was just reading Catalyst, which is the prequel novel to the movie Rogue One.
So good.
It's so good. And my favorite moment is a tiny little interaction between Krennic and Tarkin, where the Empire just formed, and Krennic looks at him and he goes, "Is it Admiral now, or Moff, or Governor? What do I call you?" And these men have worked together for years.
Right.
And Tarkin has to pause and think for a second. He goes, "You know, I think I prefer Governor." But realizing that, like, they're still the exact same people. The Republic was not any, like, less corrupt than it is after it becomes an empire. The only difference is that Palpatine is now unchallenged.
Right.
And I'm so glad you mentioned that, because one thing I love about that book is it really highlights what I think is a major theme of this show, which is kind of the way, like, bureaucracies, in any situation, but especially under, like, authoritarian rule, just become like these. It's where the mundanity of evil exists, you know? Because, like, Krennic is not a true believer. He's just a bureaucrat who wants to climb the ladder. And to me, kind of, like, part of what I think is the one of the things that I found so, like, it's really hit me hard is, you're right, this episode is showing that there's this larger thing called the Empire, which is this systematic system of oppression. That's a terrible sentence, but you know what I mean? That, like you said, that just treats these planets as places to put our stuff. But who are the people that our heroes are probably going to be shooting in a few episodes? Next episode, probably. It's not people who are like, oh, these terrible people, we need to get rid of them. It's not people saying, all hail the glorious Empire. It's people saying, yeah, I don't really like this job, but apparently there's this really awesome thing that happens in the sky. And I was told the one good side about working here is I get to see it. Mr. Boss, can I go see it? And I was just like, don't make me care about those people so much. Like, it was 2 sentences. Paul, you really harped on this, how they told so much in 2 sentences. Yeah. Those 2 sentences made me utterly feel like those people, like you said at the beginning, AJ, those two are just as much victims of this whole awful system as anybody else.
Yeah, they're just people who wanted, like, medical and dental and, like, vision covered, right? And like, they're like, oh, well, this big, you know, entity will, like, cover those things, you know, and like, maybe my mom will be proud of me, or maybe not, whatever. But, like, it's a paycheck, and, like, if I'm gonna get a paycheck, I might as well be somewhere that I can, like, see the light show, basically, every 3.5 years or whatever. I will say that I really like how little they focused on it being the Republic in the first I don't know if it was the first episode, but it was the first three. It was like the first arc, right? Whatever it was. I like that was kind of almost like a throwaway line, but it clearly was true. And how for Andor, it seems like he's like, what's the difference? You know, it's like, it's always been the same to me. And I like that. I appreciate that the show trusts the viewer to like catch that. I imagine some people are going to overlook that. I would like, however, if later in the series it kind of comes back to that and talks a little bit more about how, the Republic wasn't so great either, and it was already down this path before Palpatine seized full control of the government.
Right. And realizing that it's funny because we see in the prequels that the Republic are the heroes and the Separatists are the enemies.
Right.
But the Separatists become the rebels.
Mm-hmm.
Like when the Republic becomes the Empire, like Marva Andor, who adopts Cassian, they were Separatists. And so like that moment, that's what you talked about with muddying those lines about who's good and who's evil. And it plays right in that space of books like Catalyst, Lost Stars, Inferno Squad, these books that just like really hammer home. That's, I think, the theme of the Imperial era of Star Wars, which is perhaps the most Star Wars era, so to speak, is that idea of who are the good guys. Because there is a version of the events of A New Hope that is a terrorist and a religious zealot and his terrorist cell blow up a station that had millions of people on board. Like, there's a version of that story that's not entirely false.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Bob.
Oh, there's just like the little caveat, like, which was a station that was blowing up planets.
Right. No. And I'm like, no.
No, but
yeah, I would say even in the book Lost Stars, which AJ mentions, there are characters who utterly believe in the Empire and really have to morally wrestle with why did we blow up a planet.
Right.
And what's interesting, not all of them can do it, and some of them leave the Empire because of that.
Yeah. But
some of them become convinced that if we blow up this one planet, that will stop anyone else from rebelling, and it will, in the long run, save. And it's clearly broken logic.
Yeah.
But the book makes you understand why a person in that situation would believe it,
and that's the Tarkin Initiative.
Yeah.
The idea, rule through fear. Like the Death Star was never meant to be able to fight the entire Republic fleet or Rebel fleet. It was just meant to blow up one planet and teach them a lesson.
Right.
And that was it.
And like, if you think it's like a stretch to think that people in the Empire, not just like true believers, would find a way to kind of reconcile that and be like, oh, well, we had to do that because, we were actually saving lives by preventing the rebellion. Like, just look at what percentage of Americans think like Hiroshima or Nagasaki were like merited, had any merit. Like, it's a lot. It's a lot. Like, that's what they teach you in school, and like, it's not hard to extrapolate that to like, yeah, sure, it could be a planet, It's
right.
If you didn't meet the people. It's actually the
perfect analogy because we did want to do it in large part out of fear as well. Also, not just to make Japan afraid, although that was a part of it, but also to make Russia.
Right.
Yeah.
Soviet Union.
Well, and like it goes along with all of those kind of characters. There's a single issue, it's like 66 or something of the Star Wars 2015 run, where we learn about General Greel, or Commander Greel or whatever, who's a stormtrooper, and he talks about growing up on a planet where they were all at war, and there was a gladiatorial arena, and the Empire saved him. And he saw stormtroopers come in and save him from this life of dying in the pits. And for him, all he ever wanted to be was a stormtrooper because the alternative was or slavery and death. And for him, that was good. And like, those are the things that make Star Wars compelling. Like, the Empire is the bad guys. They are objectively awful fascists. Like, we can't argue that. But it's important to also show, just like the prequels do, just like Episode 3 does, it's important to see how people fall down those pipelines so that we can prevent our own people from falling down those pipelines.
And I think the mirror side of this, and this I'm going to use to pull us back to the Andor episode, because we all love tangents, is I think the flip side of that is that it's easy to see our heroes, therefore, as always good. And this is allowing me to bring up a particular character moment that I wanted to discuss because of the debate that I've seen about it. Mon Mothma and her daughter. One of the things I've been seeing by a lot of people is like, how dare that daughter not put more respect on Mon Mothma's name? She's so good. She's the leader of the rebellion. The father's being bad. And like what I saw, and I think giving your facial expressions, I think you're on my side here. But what I saw there was that this is a woman who is very much dedicated to stopping the problems of the Empire and does not have a healthy relationship with her partner. And that seems a large part due to her partner not being great, but she might have some role in it also. But also, as is incredibly well documented, political figures rarely make good parents, and movement leaders rarely make good parents. And what the daughter was saying was, Mom, you don't pay attention to me unless it's important that you look like a good mom in the press and in front of your political people. And I got the sense that it's like one part legitimate grievance, one part her father kind of like, encouraging her in this way, and one part 14-year-old thinking that anything a parent does is the end of the world, as most of us, myself very much included, certainly did as a 14-year-old. But yeah, I looked at that and was like, okay, yeah, Mon Mothma really cares about the Empire and her work as a senator, and maybe her relationship with her daughter is not the best because of it. And to me, that doesn't like take respect off her name. It makes her such a more interesting and complicated character. But what did you all think of that scene and how it's being interpreted?
I don't know how it's being interpreted. I don't like look at things in the world, but like, I mean, yeah, I took it as like, they do not have a healthy family dynamic, right? Clearly her and, I forget do we know what he does?
Nothing. As far as I know. As far as we know, he doesn't do anything.
Right. It seems like he used to be in the military and he's got buddies from that, but now he's just like retired, rich, whatever kind of.
Yeah.
I mean, he seems like a tool, and like he clearly is friends with people who are definitely, not on the side that we like, but like, he could still be like the more fun parent, and if he does nothing, if he's not like engaged in like the politics of everything, like it would stand to reason that he'd have more time, for the daughter than Mon Mothma does. And so, yeah, like not everyone's going to be Bail Organa, right? Like it seems like, at least from what we saw in Kenobi, that he's involved in politics and in the rebellion, which is, it's the nascent rebellion at that point, right? It's not much of a rebellion yet, but he's also very involved with his daughter, right? He has a great relationship with his daughter, and maybe at points when she's a teenager, maybe it's not as smooth, who knows? But like, you can have healthy relationships between teenage kids and parents, that's a thing. And so here, seeing that not being a thing, like that's fine too, right? And I think that juxtaposed to the formerly corporate cop guy, like, and his mom, and I think it's interesting, like actually seeing characters with parents and they're actually interacting with them, in different ways in different series. But here kind of a parallel between like, yeah, whether you're, some famous person, who's a politician, or whether you live in one of those depressing concrete structures, you can have some of the same issues, or different issues that are similar just in terms of like family relations or whatever. And yeah, I think showing, your rebels, showing your brave heroes as like having other relationships in their life that aren't always all fantastic, and it's not always all someone else's fault. Like, I think that's good. It's like people are people. And I feel like the show really treats its characters as people.
Mm-hmm. And I think that, and this is going to kind of double back on some previous stuff to talk about Perrin as well. I do think that her relationship with her daughter is very indicative that you cannot spin too many plates. You simply can't. Something spins slower. And for Mon Mothma, it is very obviously her daughter. Like, she's trying to, lead this nascent rebellion. She's trying to also maintain a face politically. And that's what her relationship with her daughter has become. And her daughter is aware enough to know it. Like, her daughter is aware enough to use that. And Perrin is the kind of man who will exploit that. And
yes, very much so.
That's what I was going to say with Perrin is I love that Perrin, Tim, and Cyril are all giving us these different views at toxic male fragility. Like, in different ways. Perrin is that apathetic rich white male who doesn't work. Like, he lives off of his wife. He's got all of these, like, friends in high places. He's got the charm and the suave to get in good with them, but he doesn't really do anything. And so he's allowed to hobnob with these people and be friends with the Empire because his life isn't affected by what the Empire does. He's married to a senator, for goodness sake. You know, Meanwhile, there's Cyril, who is just nothing but ambitious and kind of seems to have these expectations that just because he put in the work, he should be given these things. And, like, he should be able to go and take these things, you know, and, like, enforce the rules and like, all of this stuff that, like, the rest of the world is telling him, like, just sit down, man. Maybe, you know, take it easy. And he won't listen. And then, you know, you had Tim, who was insecure about any possible man, like, looking at his girlfriend. And, like, they're all just these examples of the way that the system breeds toxicity, specifically in men and male-presenting people.
I think there's some really good points there. I think I disagree with you about Cyril somewhat, but let's get to that. Let's just stay on Mothma for 1 second, because I really appreciate what you said, because I think the other thing that is so, unfortunately, kind of not entirely groundbreaking, it's not the first, but it's not common, is most of the time when we're introduced to a woman character who does not have a perfect relationship with her children, in part because she's so dedicated to her work, the point of the story is for her to learn that corporate ambition isn't important as the love of a good family, and that wouldn't you be much happier taking a reduced job and being a great mother? And, you know, that there is some truth to that story in some ways. There's also mountains of sexism in the way that story is told, especially in that it's not often told about men, sometimes is. But I felt here they weren't saying she's wrong to have her focus be on the work she's doing. They're saying this is a consequence, and it's a part of what she's feeling right now, and we're going to show you that without... It didn't pay... To me, it didn't... Saying someone isn't the perfect mother is so often a character attack, and it wasn't here. And I thought that was both great that they made that choice, but also incredible writing and acting and dialogue to show them making that choice.
You just made me realize another beautiful parallel for this show, which is Mon Mothma and Deidre. I think that was her name. The female ISB agent. Because both of them are more focused on their work than anything else. But we see one who is, you know, presented to us as a hero, and everything is falling apart in her life, even though we know she's out there trying to do the right thing and help the rebels. Meanwhile, the other one we're kind of actively rooting for, but she's working for the fascists. But we see her also, you know, having to take pills and drink coffee to try to keep up with this system, and the men are keeping her down as well. Like, we see kind of mirrored in them both the same sort of ambitions, both the same hardworking, but like you said, it's almost as if the show is very subtly telling us that no matter how hard either of them work, it's almost like there's some invisible force keeping them both from being accepted by those around them, whether it's their family or their coworkers or whomever.
Well, and another interesting part of that parallel is that Deirdre has a younger, it seems, subordinate man who's very much supporting her and very much like helping her fight her imposter syndrome, whereas Mon Mothma has his husband who's being pretty terrible. Right. And the bad guy's being the nice guy and the good guy. Like, it's all topsy-turvy in this world. I'm just finding, Paul, that me and AJ will keep going back and forth.
Sorry. Yeah, that's fine. I mean, when I have something to say, I will say it.
Okay. That's
like,
fair.
I felt like I just don't have that much to add to you know, what you were just saying. Like, You know, like
Yeah.
I will say, like, I don't find I'm rooting for her the same way I didn't feel like I was rooting for Cyril, you know?
Cyril, yeah.
Who I feel like might take a turn into the scum and villainy angle of things. Like, like this uncle, I don't know, this uncle sounds kind of sketchy. I'm waiting to see, you know, how that pans out.
Yeah.
Although maybe as opposed to the scum and villain, it might be more the mercenary working for the Empire, but like, you know, off the books kind of thing. I don't know. Like, I feel like there's going to be something a little not totally above board about wherever that direction goes, but we'll see.
Let's talk about him, though, a little bit more. What for you was like that? You already talked about how depressing that apartment. What was that scene with his mother like, and like him trying to eat that sad cereal while his mother's haranguing him? And what did you take from all that?
Well, so, I mean, I don't understand what the point of putting milk on cereal is if the milk's already blue. But, you know...
Particularly since he's basically eating Cocoa Puffs.
Right, exactly. There's some kind of...
He may be borderline a monster sometimes, but at least he puts the cereal in before the milk.
Right,
yes,
exactly.
That's true.
I mean, I thought that breakfast booth was awesome. You know, just like the actual layout of the place, I think is pretty cool. But like, it's also just a very depressing decor that's got like a little bit of kind of 70s tinge of like the, you know, the original Star Wars, like, happened to look like it was in the 70s because it was made in the 70s. But, you know, their relationship, I think, is really interesting. You know, it's like it feels like, you know, you can see how he's had this kind of like pressure on him, but then he also, like, you know, he says he invited his mom to come, you know, visit him on Premor 1, I think it is what it's called, maybe. But like, she's like, well, a standing invitation is no invitation at all. Like, you know, what was he pursuing his ambition and neglecting like his, you know, family relationships, basically? Maybe, right? I think it's the sort of thing where whatever the actual relationship is between the two of them, we don't know like the truth because each of them perceived it differently, right? Whatever the dynamic was. And that doesn't mean that either of them are really wrong or lying about what happened. It's just, you know, they didn't have good communication. And it seems like, you know, he was pursuing ambition, but like that ambition has kind of fallen to, you know, it's gotten shredded. So now he's, you know, I don't know where that's going to go. I feel like it was interesting to open on that, but then have that be like fairly inconsequential in terms of like anything else that happened so far.
It's so interesting the way that the two of you view that scene. And you have different views of it to some extent, but like, and maybe this is just about our own relationships with our mothers. I don't know. Or just like, I was so sympathetic to him throughout all of that. Like, to me, the whole the standing invitation thing is no invitation at all. To me, that's not, he should have given more. That is like passive aggressive parenting in ways that are like just, you know, I had a wonderful mother in many ways, but I think that was definitely an issue we had. And like, I'm careful with this next sentence because, to be clear, I've talked about my religion being Christianity. My father's Jewish. I grew up in a very Jewish family. I've experienced a lot of time with his mother and with his aunts, and also just understanding that part of the culture. And I was watching her kind of being like, oh, cool. Judaism is now canon in Star Wars because this is a Jewish mother. Absolutely. But not played for laughs, played for like, feel like, I was like, I had to keep like whispering in my head, like ACAB, because I was so sympathetic to him. And I just felt like, of course, he's this weird mix of ambition and fragility. And so, and there maybe I can come around more to your point, but to me, it's not, it's very much about this toxic relationship he's had with his mother, of her sort of instilling in him, like, you're not good enough. You're not doing enough. You know, she never once asks him how he's doing, asks him, tell me about what happened to you and tell me, like, let me take your side in this, you know?
You've brought me back around to what I think I meant. I was kind of exploring with Cyril because I wasn't quite where I wanted to be on him. And you just nailed it home for me. He is that pressure of expectation on men in society. It's not even his ambition. Now we've seen it's his mother's. It's his mother going, what are you going to do? You need to get a job. You know, I'm surprised she didn't ask him why he wasn't married yet. Like, I'm surprised she didn't ask him when he was when he was going to have kids. Like, that's the mother. And that's, again, looking at the way that society puts pressure on men and male presenting people to be the one who climbs the social ladder. Like, why didn't you invite me to your house? Like, no, I don't want to just come to your house because I can. I want you to be a man and invite me to your house. I want you to make a plan. I want you to, set out dinner. Like, you bring me over for a change. Like, that's kind of what I got from that, was just that overwhelming pressure that a lot of men feel, not just from their parents. A lot of times it is from your parents, but also just from society. Like, the man can't even take 5 minutes to be sad about losing his job. The job that he very clearly loved. ACAB, but he loved what he was doing. Like, he really thought he was doing something good, right or wrong.
Right.
And he's not even allowed, like, a moment to grieve that before he starts feeling that same pressure once again of, what are you going to do? You should be more like your uncle. Let's go talk to your uncle. Like, everybody's got that family member that they're compared to.
Yeah, I think that what both of you are saying is entirely true. I don't see it as being one-sided. I see it as being two-sided. And to me, it reads like two very real people talking to one another and having a dysfunctional relationship, which, and I mean, I guess I don't relate to it the same way, because that just like wasn't really ever the nature of my relationship with really like anybody, but definitely not with my mom. But I was actually going to ask, like when I saw her, I was like, oh, I was like, do you feel like she's coded Jewish? Like, is this right? 100%. And then when like today was like Yom Kippur, right? I was like,
we're recording this late because I was observing Yom Kippur and then had a dinner after sundown. And yeah, I agree with you, Paul, and that's kind of what I meant is I think, AJ, where you came to, I'm in 100% agreement. And especially because like it's not that we're saying, oh, look, young men are part of toxic masculinity because of bad mothers. It's no, all the same toxic masculinity has taught her that the way to raise a good son is you don't let him wallow. You don't let him like sit and talk about how he tried to do a good thing, but his bosses came down on him. You push him. And look, here's a positive male role model, his uncle, who I agree with you is 100% working for Cad Bane or Hondo Anaka or someone like that.
Or just the Empire. Like, I could see him being,
or the Empire.
Grand Moff Uncle Harlow,
Yeah.
But
yeah, that's a possibility. I kind of like, though, I hadn't thought of it, but I like the more that he's maybe like, he always wears a nice suit because, like, he knows some people who place bets on pod races.
Like she thinks maybe he works for the Empire, but the reality is like, let's go behind the door. Let's open the bookcase over here and go see Jabba the Hutt. Like,
for the Empire. Yeah, I work for the Empire. I mean, didn't Jabba have like stormtroopers there during Return of the Jedi? Is that no?
No,
the Godfather.
Because there's not really an Imperial presence in the Outer Rim.
No, that's true.
Yeah,
I mean, well, they're in A New Hope. There's stormtroopers everywhere.
That's because around the big towns, but not near Jabba's palace.
Right.
I was going to say something because I have a vastly different relationship with my mother. Real quick, so for those who don't know, which is everyone, I'm Mexican. And I was raised by my mother and my grandmother. And I had the opposite experience as what Cyril would have had. Like, my grandmother didn't want me to work because I was an only child. Like, she didn't want me to work through high school till I finished high school. And then if I was going to college, she didn't want me to work either. Because as long as I was going to school, because I was the man of the house, it was the opposite. She waited on me hand and foot. And that had its own damages. So watching Cyril have that relationship with his mother, for me, as someone who did not really experience that sort of pressure, was especially jarring and made Cyril especially sympathetic to me. Because I looked at it as like, how can a mother treat their son that way? That's not how men deserve to be treated. But that puts me almost all the way over toward Perrin's side, where I'm like, yeah, I should be allowed to just kind of, be the man of the house because that's my duty for having been born a man. That's the gift of it, And it's interesting to see how again, you can really see where both of these mindsets and where both of these men come from.
Yeah, that's really what.
Maybe we should talk about the man of the hour in a second.
The title character.
I think it's a statement about how good this show is.
Yeah.
That we have spent 40 minutes discussing the characters, and we haven't mentioned Andor or all the people he's staying with. We get great characters about him. Yeah. So let's do that in just a second. I'm going to quickly, though, take a quick minute just to name some of the feedback we've gotten in the chat. T.J. Stafford said, Phantom Menace was my first introduction to Star Wars. I'm not immune to its flaws, but I'll always love it because it's my gateway to the franchise that I love so much. And yeah, I love that. I love that idea of like, yeah, you can recognize something's not perfect because for me, that's A New Hope. I like A New Hope to me is a perfect movie. It's really not.
Right.
But like, it's the gateway.
Yeah. Which Buffy Bot basically said in the chat that, loves.
Phantom Menace has no protagonist, no antagonist. From a film writing standpoint, it is an awkward watch. But I love it, and I will watch it start to finish every single time I see it.
Totally fair. So let's though get into Andor himself, and because I want to talk about Andor, but also we get so much more development on the characters, and Paul and I last time were not the best on the names, so I wanted to run down who we're talking about.
I don't think they gave us the names briefly the time before, but this time they gave us characters.
Yeah, and this time they gave us characters, and they had the characters repeat the names a number of times.
Yeah, that's always helpful.
Val is the rebel leader.
Val, right?
Val, sorry. Cintra, who is played, by the way, from the woman from the house of the faceless man, the little girl who's at the home of the faceless men, the house of black and white in Game of Thrones, who's always beating up an Arya.
I don't know what that means.
Cintra, I didn't even realize that. Sorry.
Yeah, I just finally clicked for me today. Cintra, who's the healer. Nyack, who is our geek boy manifesto, who is 100% me at age 21. I wasn't good at models, but I would talk him and ear off about revolutionary theory. Cyril, who is the former cops we talked about. He's not part of this group. Skeen, who, as you said, AJ, is the other person who was trapped in this kind of foster care adoption, governmental raised children system. Tamarin, who's the second in command leader who wants everyone to walk like a soldier and is kind of left in command once Vel and Cintra go off. And then Luthen, who we will now refer to him by his real name, which, yes, is Luthen, not Stellan Skarsgård or Dr. Selvig.
It doesn't help that all of those are legitimate Star Wars names.
Yeah. Yeah, throw in one Tim,
Yeah. Anyway, so how'd you guys feel about all the scenes we got, watching the Rebels train and come together?
I liked it. I feel like it. I mean, it's interesting that it feels like every third episode is going to be action, and to have an episode this long that follows an episode as long as the last one, that there's a lot of conflict, or a fair amount of conflict, right? But not a lot of real action, and that's fine. I mean, it totally works for me. It feels like a very bold choice. I feel like the weekly release schedule maybe makes that a little bit more challenging in some regards, but I did really enjoy how they showed, how everybody was coming to the rebellion kind of for a different reason, and that they really didn't trust Andor because they didn't know his reason, Yeah. And it's sort of their degree to which they trust one another to really be all in on this plan is the degree to which they just know that the other ones amongst them really hate the Empire and are really, in it for a reason, and he's I'm here for the money. Is that a problem? And that kind of cleared the air, that it was look, I do have a reason. It's just not some big reason, yeah, I hate the Empire, but I did think it was interesting that he didn't give his story still, He's still
that did feel, the way he said it, I had to remind myself that he is being paid, because it did feel like he was kind of lying a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Right, but he wasn't, right? That's really the only reason he's doing it, at least as far as what he's admitted to himself, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I mean, like I think he hates the Empire, but he doesn't like believe in the cause in terms of like, I don't think he has any real thought that they can accomplish anything meaningful against the Empire or against the Republic or against whatever power structure there happens to be. Like, I think he sees it as like, yeah, there's the separatists, there's these rebels, those rebels, whatever. Like, what's the difference? You're all just fighting against a wall, basically. And he's like, if I can get some money, fine, I'll do it, you know?
Yeah. And I think what this episode is really setting up is that, this whole show is that, like, on the one hand, this show is doing a very good job of not falling into tropes and being fairly like, I don't really know what's going to happen next.
Mm-hmm.
But if there is anything I would predict, it's that at an emotional moment, perhaps in the next episode or perhaps towards the end, he is going to tap into more of his feelings about why he doesn't like the Empire. And that's going to help, like, move him from mercenary to revolutionary.
Yeah.
But you're right. It is for...
I don't think it's going to be in the next episode, though. I think that's like the arc of the season, maybe.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. Just going back a bit, though, to what you said about like kind of the way they were talking, like, to me, it was what I loved is that, and this is something I feel that you very rarely see, except V for Vendetta is one thing that gets into this a lot more, which is that, like, people coming together to fight oppression are people who've been oppressed. And a lot of times that means trauma bonding.
Yeah.
And like, on the one hand, you're bonding together because of your shared traumas, but your traumas are often not shared. And so often there's kind of almost a weird competition of like who was hurt worst. And also, like, and I speak from personal experience here, people who had a lot of childhood trauma become like, are often not the most personable of people. And like the fact that him and God damn it, I just read the list off. Skeen, thank you. So I was like, Screet? The fact that him and Skeen are the two people who have the kind of the most obvious childhood trauma. Like, they were in this horribly abusive, like, foster care system or whatever it is. And they're the two who, like, are in some ways have the most reason to sympathize with each other, but also have just been so learned to be distrustful of each other that they clash. Like, that made complete sense to me. I like 100% believed everything those characters did.
Speaking of childhood trauma, if you've ever worked with kids in the system or also adults who've been to prison, because they both develop similar habits that Cassian especially shows. Don't touch me. Don't touch my stuff. Like, he's very guarded over his stuff, his food, his physical body. And that all comes from when you're a child in the system. And he even says he was in a youth camp. Like, when you're a child in the system, you learn that the only thing that you have control over is on you.
Especially because, in his mind, as is for a lot of those kids, authorities came and stole him away from his family. And, like, we saw that scene from her perspective, and I have some reason to think why she thought it was the right thing to do. And I hope we get more of it, because I'm not convinced yet, but I think there's arguments in both directions. But yeah, I think from his perspective, this person stole him from his family. Yeah. And like, yeah, and that's that you can still come to really appreciate your parents in that system, but still often have like, all that distrust and stuff. And I just loved the way like Skeen kind of started to make the first move, but in that like, they killed my brother. That's why I'm in this. That's why I'm upset. And also that they did kill his brother, but it's not that they shot his brother.
Right.
It's that they ruined his brother's life and destroyed his brother's life, and so his brother took his own life.
Yeah.
Yeah, they caused his brother's death, basically.
Right. And the way he says that, and it's this real moment of connection, and then it's also like, and that's all I'm going to tell you.
Right.
And walks away.
He's like, that's the closest to an apology you're going to get. And
yeah, it was such a good line.
And Cassian's not like, oh, that's good, I accept it. He's like, that's close enough. Like, that's the way he says apology accepted, basically, you know?
Right.
Like.
And
yeah, because. Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say about this ragtag band of rebels here. One of the things I really love is they remind me so much of George's original idea for the rebels. You know, like if you look at it when George was writing it, they were essentially like the Viet Cong to the United States as empire, right?
Mhm.
And the fact that they are not soldiers, they are very much not soldiers. They don't know how to stand. Like, if you think for 2 seconds about what Cassian says about them needing to switch sides,
Yeah.
like, if they had to draw guns in a firefight, Skeen and Tamaray, or whatever his name is, they would have bumped into each other.
Yeah.
And that's not something that someone who isn't a soldier or who hasn't had to fight for their lives would have even thought of. The fact that they weren't prepared. He even asks, what were you going to do without me? But
Right.
also seeing on the flip side of that, the something special, like you brought up, Matthew, that, there's that spark that unites them that the Empire will never have. Like that little navigating tool that looks like a little Polaroid.
Yeah. I was like, is that a Polaroid?
But like that, using low tech, that's exactly how we lost in Vietnam, is like we were outsmarted by people who had a reason to fight, and saw this, this idea, and they used these low-grade tech ideas that we never would have had. And I'm not going to get into, the morality or the reality of the Vietnam War, but just the idea of these people who have a reason to fight that surpasses their ability to fight.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's very true. And to me, it also really helps, and again, kind of ties into that revolutionary aspect of like, the first time we ever see the rebels in the original movies, they're going to attack the big, huge, galaxy-ending control level station. Here, they're trying to do a heist to steal a 1/4 of a year's worth of money for this one like mid-level
Sector.
system. Like it's just such a small. The stakes are so low. Like the stakes for them are very high. They could die.
Mm-hmm.
But like the Empire's not going to fall if they succeed in this mission. But honestly, most of a revolution is going to be much more stuff like this than it is going to be blowing up the Death Star.
Yeah.
And I think that's why Luthen. Sorry, I was going to say I think that's why Luthen looks so distraught at the end of the episode, because you're right. He basically sent Cassian on a suicide mission for nothing. Like you said, for not much at all in the grand scheme of things. It's incredibly important. But if Cassian and them die, the rebellion just continues.
Yeah.
And if they succeed, the Empire is still
it's still alive too. Yeah, nothing really changes in the immediate future if they succeed or fail.
I agree with the essence of what you're saying, but I feel like there's a little bit underselling actually the scope of what they're doing. It's 3 months of payroll for an entire sector, which I think is a fairly large amount of space, and 3 months of payroll is a lot. It's a large heist, It's
a quarter. It's 25% of a year's worth of pay. Yeah, that's not.
That's a big item out of a budget, 100%. It's not going to cause the Empire to fall, but I do think the idea is it's a pretty big deal. It's just compared to destroying the Death Star, it's all right.
Right.
It's,
Yeah, and like I said, I mean, there's historical precedent. That's a lot of the early French Revolution, the Soviet Revolution, other rebellions start with movements like this.
Right.
And it's but it's dozens of events like this help in the same way that in Rebels, a lot of their early missions and even later missions are not things that are going to end the Empire.
Right.
But they're helping one group of refugees get safe or bringing food to one group.
Yeah.
And, yeah.
Just remember that timeline-wise, while Cassian is planning this heist that's going to defy, that could put his life on the line, Zeb and Ezra are stealing fruit.
Right.
Canonically at the same time.
Yeah, which I think did the what are their names? Did the Karns have a Meiluron? Was that a Meiluron in that
yes.
goal? It was.
Yes,
right?
it was. Yeah. I was going to say also, seeing this band of rebels, the thing I am most looking forward to in this show, and it's a couple episodes down the road, is when we finally meet Saw and the Partisans in their heyday, because they are going to be the exact opposite of these rebels. They are soldiers.
Right. I will say one of the things we've kind of committed to is that Paul and I have not really watched. I'm sorry, Paul.
Okay. I apologize.
Yeah. I mean, I imagined that
he's in
a lot of the same
They did name drop him. They did name drop him.
They did.
That's
I
not
definitely heard that.
like I'm not spoiling that in the sense that they did name drop him in a previous episode.
Yeah. I haven't seen any of the previews. I mean, I know I've heard like somewhere someone mentioned some other character that.
Well, Mon Mothma. I think it was Mon Mothma who said his name. Or no, it was Skeen.
No, it was
in the last episode.
Yeah,
right?
when he said. They would like do something just for fun.
So if nothing else, I'm saying I hope we see.
Yeah.
Saw in the Partisans. Yeah,
I think we'll get to see more of that. And like, and even with like the X-Wing stuff, we don't see much of this, and I would have loved more of it. But like the sense of some people who are like, can this farm kid actually fly one of these like actual like, top level space fighter craft? And his friend's like, yeah, he can like bullseye womp rats. So of course he can fly a ship and go into hyperspace. Of course.
You just reminded me of a really like sort of important thing from A New Hope that I forgot about. Pablo Hidalgo brought up this. Speaking of Mon Mothma and the importance of her storyline, when you were talking about those little throwaway things in A New Hope like that, there's a line when he tells them to take Princess Leia away, and there's a guy in the background who looks at Vader and says, "It's dangerous to keep her here." We don't know why it's dangerous. They're an empire. We haven't seen the Senate do anything in Star Wars after the fall of the Republic. And now what we're starting to get the impression of with Mon Mothma, and I'm sure we'll get it wherever they're going for whatever dinner party they're going to, like, we're getting this impression that, like, maybe there is more power to being an Imperial Senator than we've given credit before. And that line is going to be it's going to make more sense thanks to this show.
Yeah, and it is in the events of A New Hope when the Imperial Senate is actually disbanded, right? When it's like there's no more Senate anymore. And so up until that point, there's still some... I mean, in Rebels, right? I guess spoilers for the season 4 of Rebels, which we don't really want to do, right? Because covering that separately...
I think it's relevant enough to this, and enough people have seen it. So if you haven't seen season 4 of Rebels yet, and you're waiting... Are you going to wait on it?
No, I was just going to say, I think I can say it in a way that's not too specific, but there is an instance of where they are trying to... Oh, no, maybe we already covered this. We already covered this one. This was the...
Yeah, like Mon Mothma appears in Rebels in like season 2.
Yeah, but
and
let me just say the thing.
She talks about
Okay, just say the thing you're talking about.
It was the one where they go and they go back to Geonosis, right? And they're trying to get the poison canisters and take them away so that they can present that to the Senate. Because they think 100%. That will make a difference, right?
Yeah.
So, theoretically, there are still people that believe that the Senate can do something and that they can basically be like, hey, look, we're doing this. We need to stop it. We need to shut this down. And that can have an effect, right? So, in A New Hope, that's kind of the end of the line for that. That's like, oh, won't this be a problem? It's dangerous to keep her here. And then like, later that day, it's like, oh, the Senate has been disbanded. The governors.
I think that's so perfect for it, because that is also a big part of how, like Hitler with Stalin, with like a lot of fascist or, authoritarian leaders of any kind, like that's often the thing, is that you start having a theoretically democratically elected body that gives you legitimacy, but they're all your puppets, and you make them more and more your puppets. And over time, more and more of them start stopping wanting to be puppets and wanting to call out the fact that you're horrible. And eventually you're just like, fine, I don't even need the legitimacy anymore. I have enough military power that I'm not even going to pretend that I am a legitimate political figure. I just am the new politics. And yeah, like I think I can headcanon all of that into that brief conversation you're talking about in A New Hope, but we don't really get that in A New Hope. We get a little bit in Rebels and a lot more in the novels. And I'm really excited to see more of how that happens here.
For sure.
Because part of my sense is, and I think this is also where more of the, like, I appreciate that we're getting these two different levels, because I think you're right, Paul, that like it does feel like a small heist, But I think part of the point is going to be that the heist is part of a larger plan that these folks don't know about, but Lufin and Mon Mothma probably do. And so, yeah, it's going to be interesting seeing how all that comes together.
Yeah, and I mean, they've already kind of alluded to, like, they've got money problems, right? Like, like these rebels were like digging for roots and stuff and drinking some kind of milk that they did not really enjoy very much. And
in 5 years, they're going to have X-Wings and Y-Wings.
Right, exactly. And where are they going to get I mean, they're going to steal some, but they might buy some, right? And like regardless of whether they're volunteers or paid soldiers, like they need to eat. Right, one way or another, and like you can't just go around stealing Maylurons every day. Like sometimes you want to be able to be less. Yes,
but also like one thing that proves how again brings down the scope again is they're also still using the same airships in Empire Strikes Back on Hoth that they were using in Kenobi.
Like
7 years earlier, 8 years earlier. Like,
13 years earlier.
Or 13 years, sorry. I'm like, I was like, I missed the 5 there. But but yeah, like they're still using the same tech, which means that like that money goes far, but at the end of the day, not nearly as far as they really need it to.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
One thing about A New Hope also, like, at the end, it's not like they're dealing this huge blow to the Empire, really. Like, they blew up one weapon, The Empire still has all the other weapons they had before that brand new weapon went online. Like, they're really just trying to survive because they were all going to get blown up by that weapon, right? Like...
Yeah, like I think that's often a big point. Is like destroying the Death Star doesn't do anything to hurt the Empire that you knew about before the Death Star.
Right. It just keeps it from going past that point, from going to, I mean, they could still go to systems and just, kill everything there and destroy it with like Star Destroyers just shooting at them, right? Like,
yeah, which is why I always recommend, I think Star Wars is best in books, and I always recommend them. And the Aftermath trilogy is fantastic at showing how even the destruction of the second Death Star and the death of their Emperor still does not destroy the Empire. Like, belief goes both ways. Like we were talking about in the beginning, it's a powerful weapon for the Republic or for the Rebellion, but it's also a powerful weapon for the Empire.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really like the way you guys are talking about that. I think it really shows why, like you said, Paul, like it's funny to me that we're not getting action, It's funny because it's exactly as you said for last episode. The only thing we get that's at all actiony is a TIE fighter flying overhead.
Right, yeah.
But even that is done in such a cool way because, mostly what I know about TIE fighters is that they are tinfoil with no shields and fairly bad aim, and 5 of them might destroy a single X-Wing. But then in this context, one TIE fighter... like looking at rebels looks terrifying. And like a bunch of rebels living in the land hiding when an enemy flies overhead. To me, again, that's very much Vietnam and helicopters and people hiding from helicopters and stuff. So yeah, I just thought it was funny because it's what you pointed out about the last episode, but also that was such a good scene.
That speaks again to that cinematography. Just like never has one TIE fighter been more terrifying than in that sequence.
Mm-hmm. Any other thoughts on the group of people who we meet? We met them all last episode, but I feel like we really get to connect with them and learn their individual stories this episode.
We have canonical foreground space lesbians.
Yeah.
In Sintas and Vel.
I think so.
I mean, you can say, we haven't, they didn't say it, but, I mean, she already shares a blanket, and then we see both of them, and then they're together throughout the rest of the episode, nearby one another. Yes, we can do better, but it's still better that it's another step forward in just representation in general. I thought that was really, really cool. Nice and subtle, but still a good ad.
Yeah, I thought that was heavily implied, and I wouldn't be surprised if that was more explicit in future episodes. particularly when one of them probably gets killed off tragically because everything goes horribly. But we'll see.
Which won't be a barrier gaze because it will be there's a gay person among a group, all of whom get killed.
Yeah,
Right. Yeah.
I don't see them surviving next episode, unfortunately. I've come to care about Nemec too much already. There's no way Star Wars lets him live.
Yeah. Which also, though, would be fitting because not that I think this has to happen for Andor. Paul and I have been talking about how Andor is the perfect character to write a prequel about because in so many ways he's such a blank slate. We know the big points of where he gets to, but we don't know the details of how.
Yeah.
And I think one of those is that I haven't really thought about until I was watching this episode is that he's not really good at working in a team. You pointed this out, Paul, that he starts out as I don't want to work with people, but then by the end of the Rogue One, he is ready to work with people. Yeah. And to me, working with a team that mostly gets slaughtered because they're a little bit out of their depth. Yeah, that'd be a good reason why I'd be I'll work with this robot who I programmed, but other than that, I don't really want to deal with other people.
And I think you're right on the money. And earlier you were talking about Cassian. I believe it was you, Paul, talking about, he's still being very guarded about his reasons. I legitimately don't think he has reasons. I don't think Cassian has ever thought beyond the scope of his own survival yet, to the point where he even really processes that there is a system of oppression that is keeping him down. I think all of his oppression has been so personal that it's always the barrier that's in front of him. There's never that. He hasn't seen the system of oppression holding him down yet. And I think this is the thing that's going to incite him to understanding that system of oppression, meeting these people, coming to care about these people. I think they are his motivation for how he goes from being out for himself to being a rebel. And we can see it developing in the way that he could have very easily walked out of that tent when he said, "What were you going to do without me?"
Yeah.
He could have walked out and quit there and been "You guys are dead meat." But instead he goes, "I'm flying the ship."
Right.
And then they're marching and he goes, "You need to switch sides."
Yeah.
He doesn't ask. He just starts taking charge, and he's automatically, instinctively making the transition from follower to leader.
Yeah.
And I think the point you made is utterly brilliant because it really highlights the difference for him. And I think this is something that often those of us in more privileged positions who want to be part of activist movements or, real change-bringing movements can forget, is that for a lot of these characters, they remember that life under the Republic was significantly different than life under the Empire. Because there were all these freedoms and there was democracy and you didn't have to use a chain code to identify yourself, as Bad Batch teaches us. And the Empire is, to people who had a good life under the Republic, the Empire is significantly worse and has taken away massive amounts of freedom. But what was life like for him under the Republic?
Yeah.
For him, the Republic was this strange ship of aliens that comes and steals him away from his home. So, and again, it's back to Jin's line of I don't care if the Empire flag is up there if I never get to look up.
What difference does it make if you don't look up?
Yeah, and I really love that because I think that's a real big point of it is that for him, he doesn't think there's for him, the Empire isn't the problem because he doesn't remember the Republic being this good thing.
Diego Luna spoke about this movie or about this show and said it was a migrant story. And I can tell you, while I am white as the driven snow, all of my family is not, and all of the family I was raised with is not, and I use that because when you see the world, like I said, when you live with microaggressions, like you brought up that privilege, when you don't live with microaggressions, you see the big systemic thing that's holding you down. But not for Cassian. For Cassian as an immigrant, for Cassian as a person of color, it's every person he passes on the street that gives him a second glance when he walks in the street. Everyone is a part of his oppression, not just the big bad Empire. It's every single person that he interacts with that looks at him twice because he has an accent, That's why it's so important that Cassian has that accent. Like, that is the thing that made me cry when I saw Rogue One, was hearing him talk like that. Because, like I said, he already starts out at a different barrier than any other character we've had as a main character in Star Wars, and it is incredibly important to understanding why he doesn't have a story, why he doesn't care about the Empire, because he fights, like Saw, he fights this fight every day of his life. And that is something that this group of rebels does not understand with their pie-in-the-sky ideals like what Nemec has. That's why he looks at Nemec like he's crazy. We all hear Nemec and we're like, oh, that's me posting on my blog forum when I was 14 about how I'm gonna end oppression. And Cassian's just like, dude, you have no idea what oppression is. You don't know what you're talking about. You think you know, because you're aware of it and you look at it. But if you've never lived it, if you've never experienced it, you don't know.
I'm now in Paul's place of just like wanting to applaud. So I'm not going to say it. But yeah, no, I think you captured that so well. And it's funny because one of the things we talked about, I think a couple episodes ago, but was about how, like, look on the other side, look at Luke. Like, Luke's a kid who works on the farm and gets to go into Tashi to play with his friends and buy power converters. Like, the Empire, he is not suffering active oppression at the hands of the Empire on a daily basis. Maybe, like, probably life on his planet, it's not as good as it could be, and, like, you know, things are not great. But yeah, he's not going through anything like what Cassian is doing, which doesn't make Luke's story any less important. But yeah, like, I just love the way you told that story, and I think your perspective on it's so vital because... Yeah, because I remember him saying it's a migrant story, and that we hadn't really seen that yet. But yeah, right.
We have. Like, look at Marva. Like, that is white saviorism 100%. The idea that she genuinely believes that she made his life better by taking him away from his family. Like, by taking him away from that world. And, like, sure, there had been other damages already done to him. The damage of literal colonialism had already been done to his world and his people. But to think that she could just take him away and fix him is incredibly, and she cut him off from his roots. Not only does he like not speak his own language anymore, you see him struggling to learn the language. That's a tiny little detail that I loved, was Cintas is teaching him the language of Aldani, and he's struggling with it, which is, again, sort of like this callback to that idea that he's lost touch with his own roots, with his own language. You know, there's a linguistic thing there that I thought was really cool.
Yeah. I like how they mentioned that he speaks several languages, but he has a clear accent in the... do they call it the common tongue, or what do they call it in Star Wars?
Galactic Basic.
Galactic Basic. Okay, yeah. And learning a new language in 3 days is, I'm sure there's apps that will tell you that that's possible, but like really just, learning a few words is probably the best you're going to do. Right. But yeah, I mean, my wife grew up speaking Toisanese, which is an uncommon not uncommon. It actually used to be kind of the most commonly spoken in, Chinatowns around the world. But within now in the United States, you can't, she moved when she was 8, and then, she has her family, but outside of that, there's not really opportunity to speak it. Right. And so, I don't know. It's kind of hard to form a really coherent statement or thought around it. But everything you were saying, kind of registers with me in terms of understanding sort of her understanding of that language, and then English and other languages, and kind of how that works together, and how it can be difficult if you don't have he doesn't have anyone to speak Kanari to, right? Since he was, I don't know how old he was supposed to be then, but I think it was less than 10-ish at the most, maybe.
We have no idea at this point, because they just messed up everything we knew about Cassian's age going into this show.
Right.
I'm also just going to point out that the idea that you are a certain number of years old only makes sense if every planet has the same annual cycle.
Yeah.
Which,
Yeah. Well, the whole Star
that's a
Wars
whole other
thing.
Star Wars.
Yeah. But like in terms of, you know, how you can still quantify in terms of like the length of time of physical development or, you know, experience or whatever. But yes, I mean, everything about Star Wars in years doesn't make any sense. But like, you know, he said when he was 13 until he was 16, right? He was in basically like some sort of a, you know, teenager prison kind of thing.
Yeah.
Right.
Which
I think they were comparing tattoos from, which felt so accurate.
Yeah.
Which also, like, that's a thing we hadn't really ever talked about in Star Wars before, is the idea of these, like, orphaned youths.
Right.
Like, what did the Empire do with these orphan kids? Now we know. And we see that they're definitely falling into, like, gangs.
Right.
Like, those are definitely gang markings.
But also, like, was that the Empire? I mean, how old is Cassian supposed to be now? Is he...
Yeah.
You know, like in Rogue One, was he Diego Luna's age then, and then here he's 5 years younger than that? Or is he here Diego Luna's age now, and then that was 10 years old? You know what I mean? It's like, it's a little hard to...
I believe they made him like 10 years older than he would have been, because he was supposed to be 21 in this, based on the timeline we had established via Rogue One. He would have been 21, but that would have made him like 2 at the events of the first episode. So if he's like 10 or 11, it's like a 9-year difference. Like, because, and I say this because Stardust M on TikTok and everywhere is the biggest Andor fan you will ever meet. And I trust her math completely. Originally, he was only supposed to be 26 in
Rogue One? Oh.
And now he would be like 34 in Rogue One or something like that.
Well,
which is about how old Diego Luna was then. I think he was like 36 when Rogue One was shot.
I think, though, it's important because to me, if the argument is that we only have a bad like child welfare system because of the Empire, I would not find that anywhere as convincing or as powerful, because I think it's easy to say, oh, a terrible empire will treat like lost kids and orphan kids terribly. Or to say, oh, all the people in like the child protective services, you know, world are, you know, horrible racists who want to steal kids away. And like, there's absolutely lots of racism there. There's absolutely lots of neglect and terrible people. But like, I've known a lot of people who work in those systems, and often they're working their asses off, working, you know, far more hours than anyone should for far little pay. But because of bureaucracies being what they are and limited resources, the result is still absolutely abysmally horrible for the kids. And like a republic that holds the ideal of freedom but doesn't have the ability to go to a planet like Tatooine and free it just doesn't have the ability, as powerful as it is with thousands of Jedi, to challenge the Hutts enough to end slavery. I would 100% believe would have a completely broken and terrible foster care, orphanage, you know, juvenile detention system, much like our own today, you know, like it's funny, all the stuff you said about Marta and like stealing her moe and all that, like my sister is right now going through the process of applying to be a foster care parent in Seattle, her and her partner. And like, they're both white, and Seattle actually has a very good system. It's part of why she's happy to do it, where they're giving her so much education about like all the different ways that they could accidentally be like imparting their own culture, or like teaching the kids they adopt or foster that like their origin culture is not okay, and that like all these ways in which they're supposed to, like, they have to take classes on like different way to handle different people's hair and all this kind of stuff, and like just all these things, and as well as all the stuff about like, you know if you're going to have them at your family Christmas and Thanksgiving, ask them about their traditions and make like change your traditions to make them feel like and there are people who will say like white people should never adopt in those situations anyway, and that's a completely different discussion that I think there's fair debates on both sides. That's not the point of this episode. But just to say that I feel like whoever wrote that scene with Skeen and Andor clearly has some understanding of these issues, because it was like all of that felt like, yes, there's laser swords and hyperspace, but this is in the same way that like Mon Mothma's having the issues with teenagers that parents in our own world do. This is what happens to neglected kids in the universe, just like any other we know about.
And whether it's true or not, I love the idea that Skeen might have been in the same, like they might have been in similar camps, but one under the Republic and one under the Empire, and had the exact same experience. I really like that as a headcanon, like, even if not explicit.
That's a really good point, yeah. Well, we try to make these episodes about 60 minutes. We're now crossing the 90-minute barrier. We're not really very good at that. But does any of you have any kind of last comments you want to make? Actually, AJ, I want to give you a chance. You said Nyack is the character you're already falling in love with, so of course he's going to die. I hope not, because I love him too. But what do you like so much about his character specifically?
Well, it's like I said, I really like the juxtaposition of what he represents versus what Cassian lives in. Like I already mentioned, just that idea of Nemec does fall very much in that like performative activism thing. He's very much that guy who's spoken about wanting to end slavery, wanting to end systems of oppression, but like has never actually gone to a rally because he was a little bit too busy. Like he feels like that kind of guy. Says all the right things, and it's partly because he's young. He hasn't had an opportunity yet, and now he's trying to. And I do not feel like he is prepared for the reality that Cassian lives in. I don't think he's prepared to stand up for and inevitably possibly die for these ideals that he preaches. And that's what makes him such a fascinating and like heartbreaking character for me, is like, I hope he lives. I hope he goes on to write that manifesto and, we learn that he's out there, preaching the good word. But as often happens in these cases, I could also see him seeing what happens, he survives and flips. And sees that maybe he was wrong. Maybe he judged him too harshly. Maybe he gets captured and the Empire, tortures him and tells him how bad the rebels were, and he turncoats. Like, there's so many different paths. He's right at the beginning of his journey toward the left, if you will. Like toward the spiritual left, like, if you will. And it is so easy for him to give up, for him to quit. Because just like Perrin, if he quits, it's not really going to affect his life too much. Like, he can find a way to navigate the Empire in a way that Cassian couldn't. And that idea of like this wide-eyed idealist who so many people identify with, but also don't see the blinders that he has on to reality just based on the privilege of how he was born in this empire versus how someone like Cassian was.
So I feel like there's a lot of assumption there of like that all can be true, but also I feel like we don't actually know that much about him yet. You know what I mean? Where like I feel like a lot of times it's easy to see someone and make a lot of assumptions in that regard, and like those things aren't always true, they're just often true.
And I see what you're saying, and I'm not trying to make assumptions about like his background or anything. It's simply that traditional discussion of his life was not made any harder under the Empire, being a presumably a white male, but also just like a human that conforms to the galactic standard. It's not that his life was easy. Again, it's not that his life was privileged. It all comes down to that same discussion we have of his life is not made any immediately harder by virtue of how he presents himself to society.
Yeah. I mean, was he even around in the Republic? Like, he was probably just like a small kid then, right? Like,
the Republic was only 15 years ago. Yeah, he's probably like 8. He's definitely not a teenager, but I feel like he's
and I'm not saying he has any experience with the Republic. Right. I'm just saying remember, like we discussed, the same systems that hold the Empire together are the systems from the Republic.
Yeah.
And again, we also know via all of the expanded material that the Republic is also founded on racism and xenophobia and a lot of that. And so, like, I'm just taking that grand picture of what we have. And again, not saying that anything Nemec lived through was easy or he was rich or anything like that. Just, again, that, like, the discussion of white privilege sort of always comes into the picture. It always comes from a basis of, it's not that it's easier, it's just that it's not made any more difficult by virtue of how you present yourself.
Yeah, and he definitely doesn't have the same experiences and face the same challenges that Cassian has throughout his whole life.
It's interesting though, because I'll admit I saw him in a very different way, and I think your perspective, I'll admit I saw him in a very different way, and I think a lot of what you're saying could well be there, and I just missed it, and I'm really glad for that. Glad not that I missed it, but that I'm hearing from you. I saw it a little bit differently though. Is that to me, he came across more the performative to me feels like, because I've definitely met that person, and I think that person's out there. And I think sometimes that person doesn't realize they're doing it, where it's the like, you know, I think I believe in these things, and I do believe in these things, but really, like, I read these cool books, and I want to kind of show, and I want people to like my TikToks and like my tweets, so I want to kind of show off a little bit and like give the performative activism you're talking about, which I think all of us on TikTok are to some extent guilty of, but I think that like a lot more than others, certainly, but that myself may be included there. But I think there's a part of that to me, he much more reads as someone who's autistic, or like the Star Wars equivalent of that, whatever. I don't want to diagnose someone who has this like understanding that what's happening is wrong, but is just really much better at relating to ideas than to people. And I think there definitely is that sense of like that kind of the online activist, you know, it's like the person who goes, one of my first jobs was as a labor organizer. And like, we definitely experienced those kids who would come straight out of college and like, they wanted to talk about like, different, like what Marx said versus what Engels said to a bunch of like, cafeteria workers who wanted to talk about forming a union. And like, that's a disaster.
Right.
I think the reason though why I push back a bit is because I feel like part of what we established earlier is I don't think you could be part of this crew unless you had gone through some kind of major trauma or similar experience that gave you that reason. Like I don't think Skeen would be okay with the person you're talking about being on the team, because he would be that like, what's your reason? Your reason is not good enough. And I'm very open to being wrong there, though.
Skeen does mention that like nobody believes in it like he does. Like he does bring up the fact that Skeen is all, or that Nemec is all like heart about it. And again, I don't want to take away from what other people read into Nemec. I really do think it comes down to experiences, and I read that scene more how Cassian reads it, I think. And from that perspective of, I've seen a lot of people like Nemec, a lot of those young kids come fresh out of school and talk a big talk without any real experience and without the actual stones to back up what they preach. And so you see, rightfully so, what he preaches, and I see how many times I've been let down by that exact person.
Yeah. And I think it's very fair. And I think I probably identify with him much more than Cassian in that moment because of my own fairly privileged background. And so, so I think you've now, I still have most of my same feelings.
I think we're
give me a
both
much different perspective on the character.
True.
And
we're both right. Like, and that's the beauty of it.
That's why the show's so good.
Just like everything we've talked about in this show, both perspectives have merit. Both perspectives are right.
Because again, characters aren't two-dimensional, and we can either say he's performative or he's a true believer. Yeah. He's this... Mon Mothma can be the best rebel leader the world ever had and not the best parent to a teenage girl. Yeah. Like, we can hold...
And that could be okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
One thing I would say about him, though, is like, is he that kid quoting Marx? Or is he Marx before there's a Marx? Like, it seems like there isn't this, like, depth of theory that people are quoting and studying in university, right?
Right.
That's great. I like that a lot, because you're right. And to someone like Cassian, Marks would feel exactly like I'm describing.
Exactly.
What do you know? And you're right. Maybe he is that guy.
Yeah.
I kind of...
I was going to say, I think it's kind of halfway, because I think, to me, when I say he's the one quoting Marx, it's not that I mean that he's quoting the words of someone else. Yeah. It's that I think he's talking to someone on a theoretical basis where that person has had a lived experience that he hasn't had.
Right.
Absolutely. Yeah. I kind of think his future in the show is probably he's going to get killed off and then Cassian's going to read the manifesto. Right. Like, I feel like that's also, I will say, I don't think that all of these people are going to die in the next episode if they're going to be sort of the motivation for Cassian to kind of come to it more, not come to it on a theoretical basis, but come to it more as like okay, this is a thing worth doing, as opposed to like, I'm just, what's in front of me? You know, how do I have to deal with what's in front of me?
I think my pie in the sky theory, and this is not based on any previews or anything like that, I promise. Like, this is literally just based off of the interaction we had and how they compare to them. Yeah. And the fact that Skeen mentioned Saw. Yeah. I think Skeen seems so, like, out to get Cassian. Like, he seems like the outlier in this group. Right. I think Skeen is a partisan. And I think he's part of this group as a sort of a spy for Saw. And I would not be surprised to see in either the next episode or the episode after that if we see the partisans come in and sort of like rescue the crew from this fight and take Andor directly from this grassroots rebellion to the exact opposite of the same rebellion. Like, that's my pie in the sky theory, based on absolutely nothing other than what you just said right now and where my brain went.
And I love that. And again, listeners or viewers, if you've seen trailers that give you the answer to the question I'm about to pose, please don't send it in to us, or send it to us after the show is done. But yeah, I think one of the things I love so much about the show's writing is that I generally don't know. Yeah. Like, I think it is very possible that the whole team gets wiped out except Andor, and then Saw comes along to rescue him because he like came to, follow up on Skeen, and that gets, Andor into the next level of the story. It could be that, as you said, that most of this team gets rescued, and a couple of them get killed, and a couple of them don't. Like, I have literally no idea what the big climax is that we're building to. I'm so happy for that.
Yeah. Like, they've really escaped prequelitis very well so far. Where you just know what's going to happen, and it feels like there's no real suspense and there's no stakes for any of the characters, and it's like they really have avoided that being a problem. Like, somehow it just hasn't. I don't see it becoming a problem, really.
And I think it's partly because, as we noticed when we talked about every other person this episode, Cassian is the constant, and everyone else is in flux around him. And we're seeing so much growth with all of these other characters because we do know where Cassian is going. Yeah. It's the opposite of what they did with the prequel trilogy, where we spent all of our time focusing on Anakin when we knew where he was going. Like, with this, we're building the world, we're building these other characters, and Cassian is just kind of our anchor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For sure.
All right. I really want to wrap up now because we do have one quick stinger we're going to get to it later. I should stop saying we're going to do stinger kind of the quick. Purpose, but I want to kind of move those kind of things quick. No, I think I have a plan for it this time. Okay. But let me just say this. Either of you have a last word on this episode you wanted to say. AJ is our guest first.
I just want to say that I really loved this episode. It was very, very Sorkin, very like West Wing. The dialogue in this show continues to be immaculate. And I think it is the best paced show in like nerddom circles right now. It's constantly tense. It doesn't ever feel too slow or too fast. Like, I just feel like we're in a very sweet spot, and I'm really excited for the rest of the series.
Yeah, I'll echo all of that and just throw this tiny detail that I wanted to mention. Just like that guy who's in charge of Imperial security now on Ferrix, and like wants the title, even though he knows it doesn't come with a pay bump. Like, I just thought that it was just this great idea, just a little tiny throwaway line. Like, I know it doesn't come with a pay bump, and the other guy's like, "Yeah, you could call yourself whatever you want.
Wear an evening gown if you want." Just
yeah. And I just want to end with what was my other favorite lines from the episode, along with the Rebellion one, which I think kind of really goes to what everything we've been saying about Andor. And his, like, all of them are in a place of, like, we want to fight the rebellion. We want to fight we want to be the rebellion against fighting the Empire. And it's where he says, I've always hated the Empire. I don't really know what to call what I feel now.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because to me, that's the, like, to me, the conversation that he had with Luthen. To me, the conversation that he had with Luthen, where Luthen was like, what if you could fight them, though? What if you could do more? What if you could kick their... It's kind of opened this door for him where maybe he's like, maybe we're not just punching the wall. But he doesn't know it's not he had that one conversation, so now he is totally on board the way we'd often get in a movie. He's going through the process, and he's now feeling feelings that he doesn't know how to identify yet, which I just think is brilliant.
If I may, I have one final quote that you just reminded me. I did have one more quote, and that was, surprise from above is never as shocking as surprise from below. And if that is not the entire rebellion summed up in one sentence.
Totally. Because so much as we're going to talk about is that the Imperial arrogance of just thinking they're never going to rise up because they're so scared and all that.
Right.
All right. Well, we need to wrap this up. So, AJ, you're a fantastic guest. Thank you so much for being a part of this. I'm hoping we're getting some people who know you from other things who come over to listen to this. But for many of our listeners who may not know your content yet, talk a bit about kind of what you do, particularly on TikTok and kind of where they can find you and what they'll find.
Yeah, so you can find me on most places, like I know TikTok and YouTube on Jedi_Starkiller. Same with Instagram. Twitter's a little weird. It's one Jedi Starkiller. Apparently there are a lot of other people who like those two words I slammed together. I make a lot of Star Wars-based content, a lot of lore content lately, but I also spend a lot of time examining some intersectionalities with Star Wars, like race and the way that impacts Star Wars, and generally any other nerdy thing that falls under the spectrum. I'm a big fan of like linguistics. I've been watching all of the shows right now, Rings of Power, House of the Dragon, all that great stuff. So I've been periodically making content on other stuff as well, but I stick mainly in the Star Wars scope.
Yeah, it is definitely great stuff, and definitely I suggest people check it out. All the links will be in the show notes. Paul, shall I give your normal Google Zen Madman, Zen Madmans everywhere? Or do you have specific stuff to highlight?
Yeah. I'm Zen Madman in all the places, except email. There's no zenmadman@gmail.com. That's sometimes like someone there gets invited to the podcasts, and
there is a zenmadman@gmail.com who I've sent emails to accidentally. But yes, that's correct. Yeah, check that out. Great content about poker, about chess, about other stuff. And of course, all of my content is found under The Ethical Panda. If you go to theethicalpanda.com, there you'll find my website where you'll get all these episodes, all the episodes of superhero ethics. Paul and I have recently done episodes on Cobra Kai and on the movie Rounders and poker. We've done stuff about just the whole idea of like having a feeling about a piece of media where a lot of other people may feel something kind of similar to you, but for much worse reasons, and sort of how you deal with all that in a very charged fandom environment. And it's a lot of great content that we really appreciate. And of course, both these podcasts are part of the Stranded Panda Podcast Network. If you go there, you'll find like this is the Star Wars Universe podcast. There's a Star Trek Universe podcast. They've done great content on Discovery and Picard and Lower Decks and Strange New Worlds. There's the MCU cast, which does episode by episode on She-Hulk and all the great stuff. Check out all that stuff. theethicalpanda.com and strandedpanda.com. And on Ethical Panda, you'll also find all the ways to contact us, email, Twitter. We love feedback, love your ideas. Please send them in and we'll respond to them on a later episode. So with all that, thank you all so much for being great guests. Thank you all for listening today, and may the Force be with you. As you have probably guessed, that exit was felonious. To quote the Kingston Trio, great band, folk band that I love, my mother loved. But so this is our encore, and AJ, we often ask like different questions. So the question I want to ask you is, if we go through all of Andor without ever seeing a lightsaber ignite, Will that be a good or a negative, positive or negative thing in your mind?
Positive.
How come?
I was like, honestly, I love lightsabers. I love the Jedi. They're the thing that you think of when you think of Star Wars. But for me, my favorite part of Star Wars is the real people in the dirt living their lives. And I don't need a lightsaber in this show. If I see the Force at all, I want to see it through someone like Chirrut Imwe from Rogue One as a religion. I don't need to see a laser sword wielding superhero.
I feel the same. I feel like lightsabers and the Jedi are what makes Star Wars. And I feel like not having them show up at all makes Andor transcend Star Wars. Like, it transcends, genre, like, in a way that, it doesn't mean it's better than it. It means that it's something else that's like, it takes Star Wars and it makes it more than it was by removing the thing that makes it the most what it is.
Yeah, I think that's what we're going to put. Yeah. It's like when there's one spotlight on one thing, it's hard to see everything else. So this is kind of like, what if we turn down that spotlight, turn up the lights on other parts of the stage, and spend some time really looking at those?
Yeah, everything else can breathe more and carry more weight when it's not overpowered by, like, the light from a lightsaber, basically.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Which are still amazing and one of the best cinematic creations ever.
Yeah, but it makes Star Wars more in line with the other media that Star Wars presents, where you can't see a lightsaber. A lightsaber's cool, but in a book, it's not nearly as impactful, and this feels more in line with the expanded universe of Star Wars than just the films.
Right.
Sure.
And also, I feel like, and Paul and I, we've talked a little bit about this before, or maybe a lot about this before. But like,
probably a lot.
One of the things that A New Hope is supposed to establish is that the Jedi are pretty much gone.
Right.
And Luke is this last hope, except maybe for Leia. And except maybe for Ezra, and except maybe for Kanan, and except like...
It's so good.
It's one of those, like, they keep adding but one more. And granted, some of those are very much off-screen by the time Luke comes along, but like... When you always have a Jedi show up, it makes the universe feel much smaller than I think it actually is.
Mm-hmm.
And so knowing that this whole thing happens without a Jedi ever showing up in any way, to me, it makes Luke showing up to help the X-Wings so much more impactful, because they've done so much. They've gotten to the point that they have this fleet of X-Wings and calamari cruisers and all this stuff without a Jedi, which is fantastic. But now they need that one amazing pilot to take them over the hump, and that's where Jedi comes in. And I feel like, the less Jedi appear in something like this, the more powerful Luke becomes.
I agree.
Yeah. All right. Well, cool. Thank you both so much. And to all of you, please keep being good fans, because for all of you, you have your own rebellion.